Give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, followed by Uruguay and the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President. And I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, which is Poland, Ukraine, and my own country, Lithuania. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine continues to undermine the foundation of the international rules-based order. It has been accompanied by credible and well-documented reports of serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including the deportation of children, widespread attacks against civilian infrastructure, and arbitrary detention. These acts are not isolated incidents, but rather form patterns that demand a consistent and principled international response. At the same time, this situation has exposed important limitations within the current multilateral system. While a range of UN bodies and international mechanisms have been mobilized, challenges remain in ensuring effective coordination, preserving evidence, and ultimately delivering accountability. Strengthening collective actions across institutions is therefore essential to prevent impunity, uphold international law, and maintain trust in the UN system. Against this background, we would like to raise the following questions. How can coordination between the Security Council, the ICC, the General Assembly, and other UN bodies be improved to help prevent impunity? How can UN better support cooperation with international and national investigations to document and preserve evidence of war crimes in Ukraine? What practical role can the Secretary General and his good offices play in supporting the implementation of General Assembly resolutions, such as the resolution Return of Ukrainian Children of 3 December 2025, and advancing accountability in this situation? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative from Lithuania on behalf of the Lublin Triangle. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
I thank you, Excellency, for your question. The Security Council of the United Nations, the ICC, and all other entities of the UN which deal with standards and rules and resolutions of the UN should not accept impunity, should do everything to stop or discourage impunity. So that is clear, and it's not just for the ICC, the Security Council, for all the UN bodies. Secondly, I think you've heard me say explicitly that among the situations of conflict that I would address right away, engage in right away, see what the UN can do, would be the situation in Ukraine. I have also said, you heard me say earlier, that one of the most disturbing scenarios today is seeing that in all these conflicts, children, women, innocent people are suffering unbelievably. It's another reason why we cannot be indifferent. We must do everything to try to bring these conflicts to an end, because the toll, the tragedy on innocent people is unacceptable.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China.
Thank you, Madam President. The group attaches great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirms the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. In this regard, we wish to raise the following questions to Mr. Otunnu. First, on the UN80 initiative introduced by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal, and how do you believe it could advance a UN that is more effective, efficient, and delivers greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reforms fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the UN, preserve the balance among its three pillars and do not come at the expense of development mandates or other priorities of developing countries. Second, on financing for development, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the UN system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support financing for development in a manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries, particularly at a time of shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps? Third, on geographical and gender balance, how would you, as Secretary General, ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geographical balance, as prescribed by Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation of unrepresented and underrepresented countries, especially from developing countries, at the senior level appointments within the UN Secretariat and the broader UN system? Fourth, on the UN financial situation, what concrete measures would you as Secretary General undertake to promote compliance with member states' financial obligations and ensure that assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions, particularly in light of the record level of arrears owed to the organization? Madam President, the Group of 77 and China underscores the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, while ensuring the provision of equitable and effective support to the representations of all member states in the discharge of the responsibilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. The Secretary General and the Secretariat must always be impartial, independent, respectful of member states, and listening patiently to the member states, and of course implementing the decisions of the member states. It is very important, Excellency, that the United Nations should be the United Nations of inclusion. The United Nations should, even in its bureaucracy, look like the world it represents. So it is very important that whether in terms of geography, in terms of cultures, in terms of gender, the UN should look like the world it represents. It should be very inclusive. Financing for development, as I said earlier, and also in my little vision statement, I elaborate on this, that first, I insist the responsibility begins at the national level, that the national authorities should assume responsibility for their development and do the right thing. Then the Secretary General can help to knock on doors that can bring more resources, and not just those which have been part of the official multilateral development funding or even bilateral development funding. There are other possible sources now available, and the Secretary General should knock on all of them to mobilize resources for countries which have done well to put in place the plan, the arrangements for their development. On the issue of reform, as I said earlier, is no longer an option, it is an imperative. But reform is an imperative precisely because we want the good work which the UN has done in the past and continues to do now to continue. Reform should not be the ending of multilateralism, but the strengthening of multilateralism to make it more effective, have more impact, and have the UN of service. That is the purpose of reform. And it's also the reason why it mustn't be a project determined in time, but an attitude change, a transformation, a new culture that we install within the UN system. And then finally, I say that UN 80 is a wonderful basis on which to conduct reform. A good deal has been done. Much more needs to be done. We need to deepen what we should do. We need to consolidate programs and activities. We need to look more carefully at mandates to make sure that they are clear that there are resources for carrying them out. There's a whole range of things we can put. But let me just say finally, Excellency, that in my experience, we could agree on 5 or 6 things which are critical to be done, experts and member states and the bureaucracy. But I think what has been lacking, perhaps, is the will to carry through what we have agreed upon. And I hope the next Secretary General will provide the leadership when member states have agreed with him or her on what should be done, that those things are carried through and implemented.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union, followed by the next civil society organization and Andorra.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank Mr. Otunnu for sharing his vision. I speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We align with the statement delivered by the European Union. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary General who, 1, can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, and 2, who can act as a strong convening power across all 3 pillars, and 3, who can proactively contribute to prevention, peacebuilding, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence. We place high value on leadership that can connect the UN's development work with broader efforts on peace, security, and human rights, particularly in times of systemic stress. In your vision, Mr. Otunnu, you state that the next Secretary General should shepherd genuine and lasting reforms, with member states taking responsibility for coherent mandate creation, implementation, and review. What concrete steps would you take to encourage member states to align mandates with resources and to reduce duplication, while preserving the UN's ability to respond to emerging needs? Finally, Mr. Otunnu, could you kindly share your early thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including the Deputy Secretary General? How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, on the team around me, I would ensure that I have the most talented team possible, and that team reflects the membership, the cultures, the geography that compose the United Nations. Fortunately, talent is available across the globe, so that should be possible to do. On the issue of power and the role of the Secretary General, let me just say this. I say it in my vision statement, that the Secretary General does not wield conventional power. That is by design. The Secretary General has soft power that flows from 2 streams. The first is the principles of the Charter. He or she is the guardian of the principles of the Charter. And the second stream is the support of member states. When the Secretary General has these 2, he or she has soft power, a platform on which to do some important things. I said earlier that reform should not be the ending of multilateralism. On the contrary, reform should strengthen multilateralism and give it the legitimacy it needs now, and the capacity to deliver better on the function, the role that is set out for the UN in the Charter. In terms of my leadership, I think everywhere where I've had the opportunity, whether within the UN or outside the UN, I brought a certain amount of rigor. I brought a certain amount of making sure that those who may have competing views are brought together. I put particular premium on coming up, not being shy, to propose inventive and innovative solutions. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the Light Millennium Charitable Global Human Advancement Organization. Please, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, and Mr. Candidate, the UN Charter promises sovereign equality to all nations. Yet, aggressive states violate national sovereignty to seize resources, destroying human rights, vital ecosystems, and irreplaceable cultural heritage with total impunity. The double standard erodes global security and UN credibility. Under UN aid reform, my question is, if elected, what specific measurable actions will you take when a nation violates another sovereignty? And how will you use Article
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, and I think how you will use the power of the Charter to implement it. If there is a violation, please, Mr. Otunnu, you have the floor.
Well, Madam,
And I thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your strategic vision, and you spoke in French at the beginning of your presentation. We appreciate that. At a time when the UN is facing systemic crises and growing fragmentation of the international order, we believe that the issue of multilingualism is not a secondary one, the strategic lever to strengthen legitimacy, effectiveness, and inclusiveness in the multilateral system. We'd like to hear your personal position and your ability to bring this issue to the highest levels. Could you clarify in your UN work the role that you would place on multilingualism in your background and how you've come here? If you are elected Secretary General, how do you plan to make multilingualism a pivotal element of your leadership and not a simple functional tool? How will you ensure that your team's composition effectively represents linguistic, cultural, and geographic diversity at the UN? And lastly, with regard to your responsibilities when it comes to Secretariat governance, how do you plan to improve HR management to ensure that linguistic skills are fully recognized and given value during recruitment and progression processes in accordance with the requirements of linguistic diversity in Secretariat? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. You know, language is not just about communication. Language is a window on a society. Language is a badge of identity of a society. So languages, and all our languages, very important. In my prepared remarks, which I didn't read, I say more about the importance of multilingualism and promoting that within the United Nations. I believe in that very strongly. I come from a continent where there are many languages and where, you know, some of the more international ones are French, Arabic, Swahili, Hausa. There are many, many languages. So I believe that we should promote multilingualism and have the UN, as much as possible, reflect the world that it is composed of.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group, followed by Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this dialogue, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your vision. Good afternoon, colleagues. I speak on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, a cross-regional group of 27 member states committed to a transparent and accountable UN. We have two questions. The ACT Group has developed a code of conduct regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. This code of conduct urges Security Council members to pledge against voting no on credible draft resolutions aimed at preventing or halting genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, and encourages all Council members to take timely, decisive action during mass atrocities. It is supported by 130 member states. How do you see the SDGs' role in promoting the implementation of this code of conduct? And the second question, the selection and appointment process for the SG is fundamentally a joint process between the Security Council and the GA. But it is not the only area where they have a complementary mandate. How do you see the role of the GA in the maintenance of international peace and security? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, in terms of a joint process, the design of the UN Charter was to have the two bodies work in very close cooperation. And I think we should do everything to restore that the General Assembly and the Security Council work very closely together. Because the full membership is very important. The 15, including the 5, are also very important. So we really should have a cooperation between the two bodies. Now, the General Assembly initially did not have the role of peace and security. But that changed a little bit with the Uniting for Peace resolution, I think 1950. Very rarely used, very sparingly used, but it exists. But the most important thing is we should try not to enlarge polarization and tension within the UN as a body. It's one body. We should promote cooperation. And as Secretary General, I would be a go-between if there was any kind of tension to make sure that I bring the General Assembly, the Security Council, to some kind of cooperation. It is for the benefit of the institution. And I have good experience in working in both. Now, in terms of the code of conduct of which you speak, you know, all my adult life, I have been engaged in the vineyard of promoting human rights. From the time we resisted Idi Amin in Uganda as a young person to this day. More than that, you know that here at the United Nations, it fell to my lot to design, persuade Security Council members, and incorporate the regime for protecting children in situations of war. It is operational to this day. And from that, other mandates have now been added. So these are matters which are very close to my heart, which speaks to my experience, and where I have some idea what to do, where, and with whom.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Singapore and Australia.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for convening this important dialogue. And I also wish to thank Mr. Otunnu for your interaction with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. As a group of countries in special situations, the credibility of the United Nations lies in its ability to respond to the unique circumstances of SIDS, correct long-standing inequities, and deliver results for the most vulnerable. In this regard, allow me to pose the following questions. First, how will you, as Secretary General, ensure that the United Nations system is more accessible, better coordinated, and tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS to better support the full implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS? And secondly, how will you use your leadership to accelerate global ambition and action on climate change, particularly to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach, while ensuring that SIDS receive scaled-up, predictable, and accessible finance for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage in line with international commitments? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. One of the very first systematic studies done on the vulnerability and situation of small island states and small countries was, I think, done under the auspices of the Commonwealth. Sridhar Ramphal was the chair. I was a member of that commission. It did, I think, some of the early work on this matter. I've followed this ever since. I'm very acutely aware of the vulnerability, the situations of island states, small states, landlocked states. My own country of birth is landlocked and small. So I'm very acutely sensitive to the situation, and this will continue to be very much on the agenda of the Secretary General if I'm given the chance, and would certainly be advocate for them in every fora that matters. On the issue of climate change, let me say this. We have a number of very practical, common threats to our common humanity. Climate change is one. Earlier we spoke about how to harness the incredible impact of artificial intelligence. We can multiply the list. I would only appeal to member states that let us approach these common challenges that face humanity with cooperation and innovation, not from the point of view of perhaps ideological clashes and ideological confrontation, but in a very practical, pragmatic way with innovation and what we can do when we cooperate.
Thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for convening this meeting, and a warm welcome to Mr. Otunnu. Indeed, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. And more than 50 countries have aligned with this statement, and will make this list available after this meeting. Madam President and Mr. Otunnu, we are living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations, characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. And for small states, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option, but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role, not only in defending the UN Charter, but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the UN. And we as small states look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, not just the big major powers and the permanent members, but to look after, in particular, the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right, where international law and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the SSG stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. Let me now go to the questions, and I'll focus on two in the interest of brevity. First, what steps, Mr. Otunnu, will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Council has been unable to take decisive action? And in particular, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Second, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact are landmark outcome documents which provide a roadmap for global action and partnership. What would you do to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, the Pact for the Future, and the Global Digital Compact? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. If I may say so, Excellency, you know, the UN as a multilateral institution is not only crucial for small states, I think it is important for all of us. That is why any reform we carry out should be to strengthen multilateralism, not to kill it. We shouldn't throw away the baby with the water in our reform project. So the sentiments you feel as small states, I think most member states feel. Let us work together to rescue multilateralism, strengthen it, reform the institution. Secondly, the importance of international law, absolutely, absolutely. I strongly believe in that. I've contributed to that at various levels. I've taught that in various universities. It's very important for me personally and important to this institution. Now, you ask about the General Assembly and the Security Council. You know, the way this institution is designed, perhaps we should make the mistake. The General Assembly cannot take the place of the Security Council. Each have their role well defined within the Charter. But what we should promote, what the Secretary General should encourage, is cooperation between the two bodies, not conflict, not one taking over from the other. That is the way I would approach this. On SDGs, we are not on track to achieve what has been promulgated. I hope we can improve. And if I was elected Secretary General, I would make this a priority because the SDGs are very, very important to our development agenda, especially for the developing countries. And again, as I said earlier, countries must do their homework and be good custodian of the development agenda. They should fight corruption. They should plan. They should invest. They should mobilize what they can domestically. And then ask the Secretary General to help them mobilize what can be mobilized internationally. And I would be ready to do that.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of Cairns, followed by New Zealand and Uganda.
Madam President, Excellencies, Mr. Otunnu, a warm welcome. I have the honour to address you today on behalf of Canada, Australia, and my own New Zealand and my own country, Australia. At a time of heightened global uncertainty and complex international challenges, the United Nations' ability to fulfil its core mandate rests on its institutional credibility, capability, and capacity. Institutional credibility requires bold and principled leadership, including the ability to deploy the Secretary-General's good offices with political courage and effect. Institutional capability requires a UN that is focused on upholding all three pillars of its work and translates early warning into early action. Institutional capacity requires experienced and ethical management and realistic and fit-for-purpose mandates that sharpen effectiveness and delivery. How do you think the UN 80 initiative is working to align leadership, authority and resources to restore confidence in the UN and enable it to deliver results? And how would you build on the UN80 initiative to make it more effective? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of CANS. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I agree. All three pillars are very important. We should continue to work on all of them. That being said, it is fair to say that since the UN was founded in the aftermath of this horrific world war and the Holocaust, that particular emphasis should be placed on ending conflicts. And also because of the unbelievable suffering this visits on innocent people. That is why I have flagged the major conflicts going on now as a particular priority of the Secretary General. But all the three pillars are important. We must continue to work on all of them. Now, in terms of resources, it is not easy, and there's no easy answer. What is clear is that the UN is under enormous pressure. It can't carry all this burden. It is the reason why the UN should very intentionally work in partnership with other actors, especially regional organizations. When the UN was founded, there were barely any regional organizations. Thank God today there are several regional organizations, and some have played very useful and very important role. They should be encouraged. They should be empowered. There should be partnership and cooperation between the UN and the regional bodies. And the UN should also reach out to other actors when we speak about, for example, artificial intelligence. The private sector, technology companies, they're very important in this. They should be at the table. They should have their say at the table. And this goes for climate change. It can go for other areas of UN activities as well. We should be more open to others, and they open to us.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group.
President, Mr. Otunnu, Excellencies, dear colleagues, I have the honour to ask the following question on behalf of the UN80 Global Group, a cross-regional group comprising of Barbados, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Norway, Mexico, Senegal, Singapore, and my own country, New Zealand. Mr. Otunnu, if elected as the next Secretary General, what will you do to strengthen trust between the Secretariat and Member States, between the Executive Office of the Secretary General and the rest of the UN system, and ultimately to restore global confidence in the United Nations itself? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. It is clear that the primary stakeholders for the UN are member states, and that the Secretary General and the Secretariat work for the member states in the service of the people. It's important there should be cooperation between member states and the Secretary General and the Secretariat. Indeed, when we are involved in reform as we are now, we should take into account the views, the perspectives of member states, of the staff of the United Nations. Just at the opening of this session, we remembered UN staff who are paid with their lives in very dangerous situation. So the UN staff, their views, their role, and cooperation between the UN Secretariat and the membership is very important. And as Secretary General, I would especially work to promote and encourage that. There shouldn't be two separate silos, and there should be no tension between the two. In terms of trust, you know, I have worked very closely with all members of the UN. I've worked very closely with members of the Security Council, with the P5. I have the experience of working with them all in difficult and not so difficult situations. I can draw on that. We cannot go very far if there is no trust, whether between the Secretary General and member states, between the Security Council and the General Assembly, between the staff and member states. The Secretary General is the go-between. He or she must make sure that trust is restored, that we are one house and moving in the same direction with common interests for humanity. Very, very important. Not easy, but very important.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. So far, the last speaker on behalf of the group, and then followed by member states, Latvia, Namibia, and many others.
I'm honored to speak on behalf of the 120 member states of the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement affirms the role of the United Nations in promoting multilateralism and international cooperation, which are essential for addressing global challenges that impact the member states of the movement. In this context, I raised the following questions. The declaration, question 1, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1986, that is 40 years ago. What is your position on the right to development? And how would you advance its implementation within the UN system when you become the next Secretary General? Question 2, how do you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development and fully implement the 2030 Agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as next Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such measures that violate the UN Charter, urging their elimination and promoting mechanisms to prevent their application? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, I was there when the resolution on the right to development was adopted. As I said earlier, because human rights are so fundamental and so important, please let us return to the basics, which are clear in the Charter. What really matters is what we should return to. Development is very important, is one of the 3 pillars of UN action. And I would support that fully. It affects a large swath of the membership of the UN and of the population of the world. So we must not in any way relent in our efforts to promote development, and that is why the fate of the SDGs are very important. I've already commented on that. I've commented on the rule of law, all aspects of the rule of law. The Secretary General should encourage member states and all concerned to conduct themselves in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, in accordance with the principles of the United Nations which have been agreed upon, and in accordance with the norms which have been developed and agreed by the United Nations. That is the role of the Secretary General. He or she didn't make the principles, doesn't make them up, but invokes, promotes, and encourages the application of those principles and those norms.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. As we have exhausted the allotted time for the first segment, while there are still interest from member states to speak on the first segment, in the interest of time, I invite delegations to proceed also to the second segment to allow sufficient time to hear the candidates' response to the questions related to the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights, even though we already dived into many of them. Civil society questions will be again interspersed with questions from member states. Priority will be given to those who have not spoken in the first segment. And as mentioned before, we will also come to distinguished representative on behalf of their member states. I would like to remind you that speaking time on behalf of individual member states is 2 minutes for the questions and also 2 minutes for answering. As a first speaker, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia, followed by the next civil society organization and Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this interactive dialogue. And thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for your presentation on the vision for the position of the Secretary General of the United Nations and your responses so far. I would like to ask two questions. First one on the UN role in mediation, and the second one on the emerging technologies. So the first question on mediation: how can the UN remain relevant in mediation when negotiations increasingly happen outside the UN? In other words, how do you envisage to ensure UN's seat at the negotiating table? And the second question on the emerging technologies: which emerging technology challenge, for example, AI, cybersecurity, biotechnology, or others, requires the most urgent UN attention? What will be your first steps to tackle it? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, mediation, good offices, the go-between facilitating convening role of the Secretary General is capital. That is what the Secretary General is there for. So the Secretary General should always be engaged, should be probing, should be listening patiently, should not be shy to suggest. That is one. On emerging technology, there are various spheres of emerging technology. In my view, the one that right now is most transformational, that will have such incredible impact on society, is artificial intelligence. That is why I think it's so important that the UN should come in, convene the stakeholders, put to them certain issues which are important, and hope that we can come up early with a compact that helps to govern the development of artificial intelligence and transform the world for the better and for everybody.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by CMI, Marty Atasari Peace Foundation, our next civil society organization.